Thank you, Eddie. As the others, I'm really pleased to be here today for the first time that we're speaking at CIICA about children with cochlear implants. And I'm speaking to you today both as a teacher of the deaf myself, but also as someone who's been teaching the teachers of the deaf at a program at York University now for the better part of 30 years. Next slide, please. That's jumped onto the wrong slide. My slides aren't these. This is not the correct slide. I'm sorry.
Can you go forward, Case?
Yes. Connie, it's this.
That's the next slide. Yeah, they've just out of order. It's okay, Sue. A good teacher of the deaf can be nimble. What that's meant in that shift of over 30 years is that cochlear implantation happened, and it was like an earthquake that happened in our field. It all of a sudden meant that we had meaningful spoken language access for profoundly deaf students who could achieve now age-appropriate outcomes in language, with many and the majority often reading and writing at an average or above average range. But for teachers of the deaf, one of the most significant shifts was that most of these students with implants are now educated in inclusive, integrated mainstream settings. Next slide, please. And in those settings, can we go back now? Their slides were out of order. Go back. Yeah, there we go. The success is not guaranteed, however. So all those wonderful outcomes that you can achieve for a child with a cochlear implant provide support, especially beyond the early years. Many speakers have mentioned that already, because these students are in mainstream settings where they're often the only deaf student. They need to know how to effectively manage the technology. We need to ensure good listening and learning environments. We need to develop self-advocacy so that we can realize that academic potential. Otherwise, the cochlear implant can't provide for the student what is possible. So Case, go over 2 slides now, the next one, yes. So who is providing this support? When those kids are in the mainstream or before, it's most likely to be delivered by a teacher of the deaf, a speech language, or an auditory verbal therapist. However, if you look at the data from the World Report on Hearing, 79% of high-income countries have 50 plus therapists per million, but 66% of low-income countries have less than 1 therapist per million. Next slide, please. And then when we speak about teachers of the deaf, who are especially critical to providing support in schools, so many people today have talked about this continuum. The continuum at the beginning is maybe more heavily weighted to the speech language and auditory verbal therapists, but at least my experience has been that once children enter school, it's the teachers of the deaf who often take over to provide support in schools. And even in the Americas, 50% of countries, and in Europe, 42% of countries have 15 teachers of the deaf per million, and lower served areas, such as the African region, 35% of countries have fewer than 1 teacher of the deaf per million. So the support isn't thick on the ground. So the barrier here, a big issue, clearly is that we have too few teachers of the deaf and too few therapists. And this isn't just a concern in the have countries, as we often say. This is a global concern. Because even in countries where it's relatively better, and I could point to Canada, it's not good enough. I have teachers that graduate from our program who have caseloads of 100 and 200 students. That's just too many students to manage. And almost all of those students are in mainstream settings. So not only do we have not enough support people, like teachers of the deaf and therapists, we're not sure whether those teachers are now well prepared to work with a population of students who uses implants and who are now being educated in mainstream classrooms. Next slide, please. And a big part of that preparation is related to keeping up with the technology. In speaking with an education audiologist colleague of mine, she says, the amount of technology that we need to manage today is sometimes daunting and often frustrating. Something new comes along almost before you've completely learned the previous version. But it's the best possible problem to have, since it means we can give kids access to sound that I could only dream of when I started my career. So it's this catch-22. It's the wonderful problem to have. CIs give us this incredibly possibility for listening, but if the technology is not being managed and teachers can't keep up, it's not working the way it should. Next slide, please. And the teachers echo this same problem. So these are comments from teachers I've worked with. One itinerant teacher of the deaf says, "It doesn't matter how good the teaching is. If the student's technology is not on and working, no learning happens." Managing the technology is a team effort. The families and the classroom teacher and the student all need to work together if that technology is going to be in place, on and working consistently when that child is in a mainstream setting with a classroom teacher who doesn't know how to work the technology. And the preschool teacher of the deaf tells me that you can see the difference in the children who wear their amplification and those who don't. It's critical to language listening and articulation development. So this focus on the technology and making it work is critical, and teachers of the deaf are central in making sure that happens. So to just sum up, so that we can, and I think we can stay on time here, Eddie, in overcoming the barriers, or helping to overcome the barriers, and to ensure that educational success that we know is possible, because this is the good news. The part for me as a teacher of the deaf that makes me so excited is the possibility that we have for children with cochlear implants, possibilities that I could not have dreamed of 30 years ago when I began teaching teachers of the deaf. But if we're going to realize those possibilities, we need more programs to educate teachers of the deaf, not just in Canada. In Canada, we only have 2 English language programs in our big country. Globally, we have not enough programs. Perhaps we need to think about programs online, more collaborations across countries as a way to solve that problem. We also need to prepare teachers to work with the technology, but not only to learn how to work with it themselves, they need to be able to teach others how to manage it, those mainstream classroom teachers, the parents, and then ultimately the children themselves to be responsible for managing their technology. And in that continuum that Anne and Laya and Paige talked about, we need to provide support beyond the early years to help deaf students with cochlear implants manage the challenges of the mainstream classroom so that they can achieve that amazing potential that we know is now possible for so many of our children with cochlear implants.